Hello, and welcome to The Bard's Truth, with yours truly, the Green Bard. This is the Direwolves of Winterfell, Part 3, Nymeria and Arias Bond. While not required, you may want to listen to Part 1, covering Lady and Sansa, or Part 2, covering Grey Wind and Robb, before proceeding. Part 4, covering Summer and Bran, Part 5, covering Shaggydog and Rickon, and Part 6, covering Ghost and Jon, are all available on my blog and coming to this channel. Recall this SSM. Question. Are all the Stark children wargs/skin changers with their wolves? George R.R. Martin. To a greater or lesser degree, yes, but the amount of control varies widely. A note about the order of this series. I'm doing this analysis in order of what I think is increasing magical power of the direwolves. We have 4 wolves with eyes of molten gold, so I'm focusing on them first and then finishing with our green-eyed and finally our red-eyed direwolf. The order chosen within the group of the first 4 wolves was chosen in the order of increasing magical strength of their Stark children. Arya, I think, is stronger in her magic than Sansa or Robb for a variety of reasons. Bran, of course, seems to be extremely strong. While it's possible that Arya is equal to him in magical potential, the general consensus is that Bran is exceptional, so we'll give him the edge and cover him in Part 4. A Game of Thrones. Nymeria with and then isolated from Arya. Several themes from our prior volumes continue here with Nymeria and her bond to Arya, including shadowing/protecting and the accompanying fear of the wolves and the savagery of their attacks. The wolves mirroring their children's personality and vice versa. A subset of that is obedience/independence. Being affectionate when they're together. Belonging to the pack/hunting. Bad things happening when they are separated. These are all in evidence for the pair while together in A Game of Thrones, where they spend such a short time together before being separated. In later volumes, we see that even though they are separated, the bond is still strong between them. A Game of Thrones, Arya 1. We start with Nymeria having been tied up while Arya was with Princess Myrcella. Immediately, we see their affection for each other and their closeness, save when they are forced to be separated, as Cat has done here. Mirroring of their personalities is evident even in the wolf's name, Nymeria, a figure of female empowerment and independence. The scene closes with Nymeria shadowing Arya, checking off each of the themes listed before, save one, which comes later in the chapter. Nymeria's bond with Arya is developed quickly indeed.
Nymeria was waiting for her in the guardroom at the base of the stairs. She bounded to her feet as soon as she caught sight of Arya. Arya grinned. The wolf pup loved her, even if no one else did. They went everywhere together, and Nymeria slept in her room at the foot of her bed. If Mother had not forbidden it, Arya would gladly have taken the wolf with her to needlework. Let Septa Mordane complain about her stitches then. Nymeria nipped eagerly at her hand as Arya untied her. She had yellow eyes. When they caught the sunlight, they gleamed like 2 golden coins. Arya had named her after the warrior queen of the Rhoyne, who had led her people across the narrow sea. That had been a great scandal, too. Sansa, of course, had named her pup Lady. Arya made a face and hugged the wolfling tight. Nymeria licked her ear and she giggled. By now Septa Mordane would certainly have sent word to her lady mother. If she went to her room, they would find her. Arya did not care to be found. She had a better notion. The boys were at practice in the yard. She wanted to see Robb put gallant Prince Joffrey flat on his back. Come, she whispered to Nymeria. She got up and ran, the wolf coming hard at her heels.
Next, they encounter Ghost and Jon, and we see pack interaction. Nymeria is wary of the larger Ghost, but they seem to get along. Arya and Jon in turn are of one mind about the unfairness of being outcast. The theme of the call of the pack is evident where Nymeria begins to follow Ghost before realizing that she and Arya are not going along with them. The pack bond/instinct is strong in these wolves.
They arrived, flushed and breathless, to find Jon seated on the sill, one leg drawn up languidly to his chin. He was watching the action, so absorbed that he seemed unaware of her approach until his white wolf moved to meet them. Nymeria stalked closer on wary feet. Ghost, already larger than his littermates, smelled her, gave her ear a careful nip, and settled back down.
Later.
Nothing is fair, Jon said. He messed up her hair again and walked away from her, Ghost moving silently beside him. Nymeria started to follow too, then stopped and came back when she saw that Arya was not coming. Reluctantly, she turned in the other direction.
A Game of Thrones, Jon 2. The pair encounter their brothers again when Ghost and Jon visit to make their farewells and to give Needle to Arya. Nymeria seems happy to see Ghost this time, mirroring Arya and Jon's relationship. Nymeria is also fetching specific items for Arya to pack. Is this an example of them sharing one mind in near warging? This type of cooperation is reminiscent of Grey Wind and Robb much later in the story. At the end, Arya commands Nymeria to guard, and she obeys without issue. The tension between obedience and independence is important to Nymeria's story. In my humble opinion, she does obey, but is more independent and questions authority as a mirroring to Arya's personality. Arya was in her room, packing a polished ironwood chest that was bigger than she was. Nymeria was helping. Arya would have to point, and the wolf would bound across the room, snatch up some wisp of silk in her jaws, and fetch it back. But when she smelled Ghost, she sat down on her haunches and yelped at them. Later. I don't think she'd like Nymeria helping either. The she-wolf regarded him silently with her dark golden eyes. It's just as well. I have something for you to take with you, and it has to be packed very carefully. Later. Wary but excited, Arya checked the hall. Nymeria, here, guard. She left the wolf out there to warn of intruders and closed the door. By then, Jon had pulled off the rags he'd wrapped it in. He held it out to her. Arya's eyes went wide. Dark eyes, like his. A sword, she said in a small, hushed breath. A Game of Thrones, Sansa 1. We don't get another Arya POV until they arrive in King's Landing, so Sansa takes up Nymeria's tale while they are on the road. This eventful chapter draws a stark contrast between the sisters as discussed in Part 1. That contrast is mirrored in the wolf's obedience/independence. As Arya brushes her, Nymeria struggles, mirroring Arya's independent streak. She is also mood mirroring Arya. Neither seem to be enjoying the brushing process. We also see snips of how close the pair are in Arya's dialogue.
She found Arya on the banks of the Trident, trying to hold Nymeria still while she brushed dried mud from her fur. The direwolf was not enjoying the process. Arya was wearing the same riding leathers she had worn yesterday and the day before.
Later.
Arya shrugged. Hold still, she snapped at Nymeria. I'm not hurting you. Then to Sansa, she said, when we were crossing the neck, I counted 36 flowers I never saw before, and Micah showed me a lizard lion.
Later.
Arya was still going on, brushing out Nymeria's tangles and chattering about things she'd seen on the trek south. Last week we found this haunted watchtower, and the day before we'd chased a herd of wild horses. You should have seen them run when they caught a scent of Nymeria. The wolf wriggled in her grasp, and Arya scolded her. Stop that! I have to do the other side! You're all muddy!
Later.
Arya shrugged. I didn't go far. Anyway, Nymeria was with me the whole time. I didn't always go off either. Sometimes it's fun just to ride along with the wagons and talk to people.
Later.
Arya ignored her. She gave a hard yank with the brush. Nymeria growled and spun away, affronted. Come back here! There's going to be lemon cakes and tea, Sansa went on, all adult and reasonable. Lady brushed against her leg. Sansa scratched her ears the way she liked, and Lady sat beside her on her haunches, watching Arya chase Nymeria. Why would you want to ride a smelly old horse and get all sore and sweaty when you could recline on feather pillows and eat cakes with the queen? I don't like the queen, Arya said casually. Sansa sucked in her breath, shocked that even Arya would say such a thing, but her sister prattled on, heedless. She won't even let me bring Nymeria. She thrust the brush under her belt and stalked her wolf. Nymeria watched her approach warily. A royal wheelhouse is no place for a wolf, Sansa said, and Princess Myrcella is afraid of them. You know that. Myrcella is a little baby. Arya grabbed Nymeria round her neck, but the moment she pulled out the brush again, the direwolf wriggled free and bounded off. Frustrated, Arya threw down the brush. Bad wolf, she shouted.
Later.
She turned to walk off, but Arya shouted after her. They won't let you bring Lady either! She was gone before Sansa could think of a reply, chasing Nymeria along the river.
That cute interaction represents the last time that Arya and Sansa get along in the story, something I hope will eventually reverse in their reunion. Unfortunately, our next scene is where Joffrey attacks Arya and Micah. Note that Arya already mentioned him earlier, as did Sansa with her mention of Arya's bruises. He was clearly a close friend by this point. The blame in this encounter is very important, as it determines the future of both wolves and sets the mood for the girls' interactions for the remainder of this volume. Let's be clear, Joffrey starts it, attacks Mycah, and sadistically tortures/threatens him. Then Arya hits him with a stick to protect her friend. Warranted. She strikes him again as Mycah escapes, also warranted to enable the escape. Then Sansa thinks that Arya threw a rock at Joffrey's head, which would be taking it too far. But we don't actually know if Arya was aiming at Joffrey. We only get Sansa's opinion that Arya missed and hit the horse. She might have been trying to hit the horse to deprive Joffrey of the ability to chase Mycah. I think this is quite plausible, as the author makes sure to mention it going toward Mycah in the same sentence. Joffrey then slashes at her with his sword, a completely shocking act. Arya is truly frightened and retreats, but ends up between Joffrey and a tree. Then and only then does Nymeria act, judiciously grabbing at Joffrey's arm, not his throat, which might be warranted. She then immediately obeys Arya when called off. All in all, Nymeria is nothing short of a hero here. Arya again does the right thing, de-escalating by removing Lion's Tooth from the equation.
Sansa slid off her mare, but she was too slow. Arya swung with both hands. There was a loud crack as the wood split against the back of the prince's head, and then everything happened at once before Sansa's horrified eyes. Joffrey staggered and whirled around, roaring curses. Mycah ran for the trees as fast as his legs would carry him. Arya swung at the prince again, but this time Joffrey caught the blow on Lion's Tooth and sent her broken stick flying from her hands. The back of his head was all bloody, and his eyes were on fire. Sansa was shrieking, "No, no! Stop it! Stop it! Both of you! You're spoiling it!" But no one was listening. Arya scooped up a rock and hurled it at Joffrey's head. She hit his horse instead, and the blood bay reared and went galloping off after Mycah. "Stop it! Don't! Stop it!" Sansa screamed. Joffrey slashed at Arya with his sword, screaming obscenities, terrible words, filthy words. Arya darted back, frightened now, but Joffrey followed, hounding her toward the wood, backing her up against a tree. Sansa didn't know what to do. She watched helplessly, almost blind from her tears. Then a gray blur flashed past her, and suddenly Nymeria was there, leaping, jaws closing around Joffrey's sword arm. The steel fell from his fingers as the wolf knocked him off his feet, and they rolled in the grass, the wolf snarling and ripping at him, the prince shrieking in pain. "Get it off!" he screamed. "Get it off!" Arya's voice cracked like a whip. "Nymeria!" The direwolf let go of Joffrey and moved to Arya's side. The prince lay in the grass, whimpering, cradling his mangled arm. His shirt was soaked in blood. Arya said, "She didn't hurt you." "Much." She picked up Lion's Tooth where it had fallen, and stood over him, holding the sword with both hands. "You leave him alone!" Sansa screamed at her sister. Arya whirled and heaved the sword into the air, putting her whole body into the throw. The blue steel flashed in the sun as the sword spun out over the river. It hit the water and vanished with a splash. Joffrey moaned. Arya ran off to her horse, Nymeria loping at her heels.
The encounter ends with Nymeria having proven her bona fides as a protector, reassuming her role as Arya's shadow. Sadly, this is not meant to continue. A Game of Thrones, Eddard 3. In the aftermath of the debacle, Arya calmly tells her tale, but grows angry and wild at Joffrey and Sansa's lies. I do wonder if her bond to Nymeria is affecting her behavior here. Arya may even be mirroring Nymeria's mood to some extent. After Cersei determines that Lady is to be executed, Arya grows wild again in defense of her pack.
"Lady wasn't there," Arya shouted angrily. "You leave her alone." "Stop them," Sansa pleaded. "Don't let them do it. Please, please. It wasn't Lady. It was Nymeria. Arya did it. You can't. It wasn't Lady. Don't let them hurt Lady. I'll make her be good. I promise. I promise." She started to cry.
The chapter ends with Lady's death, but before that, Ned sees the Hound return with Mycah's body, while the author cruelly lets us think it was Nymeria. There was something slung over the back of the destrier, a heavy shape wrapped in a bloody cloak. "No sign of your daughter, Hand," the Hound rasped down. But the day was not wholly wasted. "We got her, little pet." He reached back and shoved the burden off, and it fell with a thump in front of Ned. Bending, Ned pulled back the cloak, dreading the words he would have to find for Arya. But it was not Nymeria after all. It was the butcher's boy, Mycah. His body covered in dried blood. He had been cut almost in half from shoulder to waist by some terrible blow struck from above. Nymeria's survival becomes plain when she returns to the story in A Clash of Kings. For the remainder of A Game of Thrones, Arya mourns her loss and Mycah's, while Sansa continues to blame Arya and Nymeria for all her woes. A Game of Thrones, Eddard 4. This is poignant in Ned's following chapter. The event at the fords split wide the cracks that were in these relationships, while Nymeria was abandoned. We must assume she felt lost, just as Arya is in this chapter. The last fortnight of their journey had been a misery. Sansa blamed Arya and told her that it should have been Nymeria who died. And Arya was lost after she heard what happened to her butcher's boy. Sansa cried herself to sleep. Arya brooded silently all day long, and Eddard Stark dreamed of a frozen hell reserved for the Starks of Winterfell. We can assume that a stretched bond still exists between Nymeria and Arya during the rest of A Game of Thrones. Recalling our 5 themes of the wolf bonds, 3 are torn away at this time. Nymeria is stripped of her role as a protector, can no longer be affectionate with Arya, and is physically isolated from her pack. As to bad things happening when the wolves are separated from their humans, that is obvious with the Starks' experiences in King's Landing. She probably does still mirror Arya's moods to some degree. A Game of Thrones, Arya 2. Arya finally has another POV where we get to see those moods up close. Nymeria enters her thoughts when she's angry with Sansa, practicing with Needle and considering to run away. Nymeria certainly would want to rejoin Arya at this point, as she thinks. All these shared thoughts would probably call her to Arya, in fact. This is definitely an indication of the bond. It also is interesting that Arya's bond to Jon is recalled when she thinks of Nymeria. The 4 of them have several happy memories of time spent together at Winterfell.
She went back to the window, needle in hand, and looked down into the courtyard below. If only she could climb like Bran, she thought. She would go out the window and down the tower. Run away from this horrible place. Away from Sansa and Septa Mordane and Prince Joffrey. From all of them. Steal some food from the kitchens, take Needle and her good boots and a warm cloak. She could find Nymeria in the wild woods below the Trident, and together they'd return to Winterfell, or run to Jon on the wall. She found herself wishing that Jon was here with her now. Then maybe she wouldn't feel so alone.
That last line is particularly heart-wrenching. Nymeria must also be extremely lonely at this point. One must wonder when she begins to form her new pack. We may have a hint later in the chapter when Ned then brings up Nymeria again, saying, "The lone wolf dies, but the pack survives." Surely Nymeria's pack instinct kicks in and she joins a pack relatively quickly. He can also see, as we do, how close their bond was, how Arya missed Nymeria.
"We all lie," her father said. "Or did you truly think I'd believe that Nymeria ran off?" Arya blushed guiltily. "Jory promised not to tell." "Jory kept his word," her father said with a smile. "There are some things I do not need to be told. Even a blind man could see that wolf would never have left you willingly." "We had to throw rocks," she said miserably. "I told her to run, to go be free, that I didn't want her anymore. There were other wolves for her to play with. We heard them howling, and Jory said the woods were full of game, so she'd have deer to hunt. Only she kept following, and finally we had to throw rocks. I hit her twice. She whined and looked at me, and I felt so shamed. But it was right, wasn't it? The queen would have killed her."
Later.
"The hard, cruel times," her father said. "We tasted them on the Trident, child, and when Bran fell. You were born in the long summer, sweet one. You've never known anything else. But now, the winter is truly coming. Remember the sigil of our house, Arya." "The direwolf," she said, thinking of Nymeria. She hugged her knees against her chest, suddenly afraid. "Let me tell you something about wolves, child. When the snows fall and the white winds blow, the lone wolf dies, but the pack survives. Summer is the time for squabbles. In winter, we must protect one another, keep each other warm, share our strengths. So if you must hate, Arya, hate those who would truly do us harm. Septa Mordane is a good woman, and Sansa. Sansa is your sister. You may be as different as the sun and the moon, but the same blood flows through both your hearts. You need her as she needs you, and I need both of you. Gods help me."
When Arya suddenly feels afraid after thinking of direwolves, is this possibly mirroring fear from Nymeria? Could Nymeria be fearful because she knows she cannot get to the city to protect Arya? I also find Ned's discussion of the importance of pack to be quite an endearing parenting moment. One must wonder how different Sansa's road may have been if he'd taken the time to give her the same advice. The pack bond is strong, but it's weaker in Sansa, who has no wolf. A Game of Thrones, Arya 3. Nymeria only comes up once more in A Game of Thrones, when Arya was following Varys and Illyrio. I'd suggest this is an example of the bond as well, She needed her protector, but she also needed confidence, which Nymeria seemed to provide.
She must have crept after them for miles. Finally they were gone, but there was no place to go but forward. She found the wall again and followed, blind and lost, pretending that Nymeria was padding along beside her in the darkness. At the end she was knee-deep in foul-smelling water, wishing she could dance upon it as Syrio might have, and wondering if she'd ever see light again. It was full dark when finally Arya emerged into the night air.
And perhaps Nymeria was there with her, their minds partially mingled, set off by Arya's sensory deprivation in that dark place. We know that their connection gets much stronger during the sensory deprivation later in the Blind Beth chapter, just as Bran and Summer's connection strengthens when he hides in the darkness of the crypts of Winterfell. It's not out of the question. So that does it for Arya and Nymeria in A Game of Thrones. Join us next time for A Clash of Kings, the Great She-Wolf and the Shape Changer Survivor. Thanks to all the terrific artists who let me use their work on this YouTube video. If you enjoy this content, you can also consider supporting us on Patreon.
Crying cockles and muscles alive, alive.